Part 1 of Lord Tedric. Recording by Phil Chenevert. Lord Tedric by E. Smith. Part 1. Skandos One, the Skandos of time track number 1, numbered for reasons which will become clear, showed by means of the chronoviograph that civilization would destroy itself in 187 years. To prevent this catastrophe, he went back to the key point in time and sought out the key figure, one Tedric, a Lomarian ironmaster who had lived and died a commoner, unable ever to do anything about his fanatical detestation of human sacrifice. Skandos One taught Tedric how to make one batch of super steel, watched him forge armor and arms from that highly anachronistic alloy. He watched him do things that Tedric of Time Track 1 had never done. Time, then, did fork. Time Track 1 was probably no longer in existence. He must have been saved by his traction on the reality of Time Track 2. He'd snap back up to his own time and see what the situation was. If he found his assistant Furman alone in the laboratory, the extremists would have been proved wrong. If not, Furman was not alone. Instead, Skandos 2 and Furman 2 were at work on a tri-D of Tedric's life, so like and yet so wildly unlike the one upon which Skandos 1 and Furman 1 had labored so long. Shaken and undecided, Skandos 1 held his machine at the very verge of invisibility and watched and listened. But it's so maddeningly incomplete, Skandos 2 snorted. When it goes into such fine detail on almost everything else, why can't we get how he stumbled onto one lot and never any other of high alloy steel? Chrome, nickel, vanadium, molybdenum, tungsten steel, Mortison's super steel to be specific, which wasn't rediscovered for thousands of years. Why, it was revealed to him by his personal god Losir, don't you remember? Furmin snickered. Poppycock. To us, yes, but not to them. Hence, no detail. And you know why we can't go back and check. Of course, we simply don't know enough about time. But I would so like to study this Lord of the Marches at first hand. Nowhere else in all reachable time does any other one entity occupy such a uniquely key position. So would I, Chief. If we knew just a little more, I'd say go. In the meantime, let's run that tri-D again to see if we've overlooked any little thing. In the three-dimensional full-color projection, Arms Master Lord Tedric destroyed the principal images of the monstrous god Sarpedion and killed Sarpedion's priests. He rescued Lady Rhoann, King Fagon's eldest daughter, from the sacrificial altar. The king made him Lord of the Marches, the highest of the high. This part I like. Furman pressed a stud. The projector stopped. A blood-smeared, armored giant and a blood-smeared naked woman stood, arms around each other, beside a blood-smeared altar of green stone. Talk about being stacked. If I hadn't checked the data myself, I'd swear you went overboard there, Chief. Exact likenesses, life size, Skandos 2 grunted. Tedric, 6'4", 230, muscled just like that. Rhoann, 6 feet and half an inch, 190. The only time she ever appeared in the raw in public, I guess, but she didn't turn a hair. What a couple! Furman stared enviously. We don't have people like that anymore. Fortunately, no. He could split a full armored man in two with a sword. She could strangle a tiger barehanded. So what? All the brains of the whole damned tribe boiled down into one wouldn't equip a half-wit. Oh, I wouldn't say that, Furman objected. Fagon was a smooth, shrewd operator. In a way, sometimes. But committing suicide by wearing gold armor instead of high alloy steel doesn't show much brain power. I'm not sure I'll buy that either. There were terrific pressures, but say Fagon had worn steel that day at Middlemarch Castle and lived 10 or 15 years longer. My guess is that Tedric would have changed the map of the world. He wasn't stupid, just bullheaded, and Fagon could handle him. He would have pounded a lot of sense into his skull if he had lived. However, he didn't live, Skandos returned dryly, and so every decision Tedric ever made was wrong. But to get back to the point, did you see anything new? Not a thing. Neither did I. So go and see how 812 is doing. For time test number 811 had failed, and there was little ground for hope that number 812 would be any more productive. And the lurking Skandos One, who had been studying intensively every aspect of the situation, began to act. It was crystal clear that Time Track 2 could hold only one Skandos. One of them would have to vanish, completely, immediately, and permanently. Although in no sense a killer by instinct or training, only one course of action was possible if his own life, and as a matter of fact all civilization, were to be conserved. Wherefore he synchronized and shot his unsuspecting double neatly through the head. The living Skandos changed places with the dead. A timer buzzed briefly. The time machine disappeared, completely out of synchronization with any continuum that a world's keenest brain and an ultra-fast calculator could compute. This would, of course, make another fork in time, but that fact did not bother Skandos One at all, now. As for Tedric, since the big dumb lug couldn't be made to believe that he, Skandos One, was other than a god, he'd be a god in spades. He'd build an image of flesh-like plastic exactly like the copper statue Tedric had made, and go back and announce himself publicly as the god Losir. He'd come back along Time Track 3, of course, and do away with Skandos 3. There might have to be another interference, too, to get Tedric started along the right time track. He could tell better after seeing what Time Track 3 looked like. If so, it would necessitate the displacement of Skandos 4. So what? He had never had any qualms, and now that he had done it once, he had no doubt whatever as to his ability to do it twice more. Of the three standing beside Sarpedion's grisly altar, King Fagon was the first to become conscious of the fact that something should be done about his daughter's nudity. "Flosnir, your cloak," he ordered sharply, and the Lady Rhoann, unclamping her arms from around Tedric's armored neck and disengaging his steel-clad arm from around her waist, covered herself with the proffered garment. Partially covered, that is, for since the cloak had come to only mid-thigh on the courtier, and since she was a good 7 inches taller than he, the coverage might have seemed to a prudish eye something less than adequate. "Chamberlain Schillian, Captain Skyro," the king went on briskly, "haul me this carrion to the river and dump it in. Put men to cleaning this place. 'Tis not seemly so." The designated officers began to bawl orders, and Tedric turned to the girl, who was still just about as close to him as she could get, awe, wonder, and relieved shock still plain on her expressive face. "One thing, Lady Rhoann, I understand not. You seem to know me, act as though I were an old, tried friend. 'Tis vast honor. But how? You, of course, I know, have known and honored since you were a child. But me, a commoner, you know not. Nor if you did, couldst know who it was neath all this iron? Art wrong, Lord Tedric. Nay, not Lord Tedric. Henceforth you and I are Tedric and Rhoann, merely. I have known you long and well, would recognize you anywhere. The few of the old, true blood stand out head and shoulders above the throng, and you stand out, even among them. Who else could it have been? Who else hath the strength of arm and soul, the inner and the outer courage? No coward I, Tedric, nor ever called so, but on that altar my very bones turned jelly. I could not have swung weapon against Sarpedion. I tremble yet at the bare thought of what you did. I know not how you could have done it. You feared the god, Lady Rhoann, as do so many. I hated him. 'Tis not enough of explanation. And Rhoann merely, Tedric, remember? Rhoann, thanks, my lady. 'Tis an honor more real than your father's patent of nobility, but 'tis not fitting. I feel as much a commoner. Commoner? Bah! I ignored that word once, Tedric, but not twice. You are, and deservedly, the highest of the high. My father the king has known for long what you are. He should have ennobled you long since. Thank all the gods he had the wit to put it off no longer. 'Tis blood that tells, not empty titles. The throne can make and unmake nobility at will, but no power whatever can make true bloods out of mongrels, nor create real manhood where none exists. Tedric did not know what to say in answer to that passionate outburst, so he changed the subject, effectively if not deftly. In speaking of the marches to your father the king, you mentioned the sages. What said they? At another time, perhaps. Lady Rhoann was fast recovering her wonted cool poise. "'Tis far too long to go into while I stand here half naked, filthy, and stinking. Let us on with the business at hand, which for me is a hot bath and clean clothing." Rhoann strolled away as unconcernedly as though she were wearing full court regalia, and Tedric turned to the king. "Thinks the Lady Trice is nearby, sire?" "If I know the jade at all, she is," Fagon snorted. "And not only near, she's seen everything and heard everything, knows more about everything than either of us, or both of us together. Why? Thinks she'd make a good priestess?" "The best. Much more so, methinks, than the Lady Rhoann. Younger, more priestess-like, say?" "Perhaps." Fagon was very evidently skeptical, but looked around the temple anyway. "Trice?" he yelled. "Yes, father," a soft voice answered, right behind them. The king's second daughter was very like his first in size and shape, but her eyes were a cerulean blue, and her hair, as long as thick as Rhoann's own, had the color of ripe wheat. "Aye, daughter. Wouldst like to be priestess of Losir?" "Oh, yes!" she squealed, but sobered quickly. "On second thought, perhaps not. No. If so be its sacrifice is done, I intend to marry some day and have 6 or 8 children. But perhaps could I take it now and resign later, think you?" "'Twould not be necessary, sire and Lady Trice," Tedric put in, while Fagon was still thinking the matter over. "Losir is not at all like Sarpedion. Losir wants abundance and fertility and happiness, not poverty and sterility and misery. Losir's priestess marries as she pleases and has as many children as she wants." "Your priestess I, then, sirs. I go to have cloth of gold robes made at once." The last words came floating back over her shoulder as Trice raced away. "Lord Tedric, sir." Unobserved, Sciro had been waiting for a chance to speak to his superior officer. "Yes, Captain." "'Tis the men, the cleaning. I mean." Sciro of Old Lomar would not pass the buck. "The bodies, the priests, you know, and so on, were easy enough, and we did manage to handle most of the pieces of the god. But the heart and so on, we know not where you want them taken. And besides, we fear. Will stand by and ward Lord Tedric while I pick them up. 'Tis my business, Captain Skyro, mine alone. I crave pardon for not attending to it sooner. Hast a bag? Yea. The highly relieved officer held out a duffel bag of fine, soft leather. Tedric took it, strode across to the place where Sarpedion's image had stood, and, not without a few qualms of his own, now that the frenzy of battle had evaporated, picked up Sarpedion's heart, liver, and brain, and deposited them, neither too carefully nor too carelessly, in the sack. Then, swinging the burden up over his shoulder, I go to fetch the others, he explained to the king. Then we hold sacrifice to end all human sacrifice. Hold, Tedric, Fagon ordered. One thing, or two or three, methinks. 'Tis not seemly to conduct a thing so, lacking order and organization and plan. Where dost propose to hold such an affair? Not in your ironworks, surely? Certainly not, sire. Tedric halted, almost in mid-stride. He hadn't got around yet to thinking about the operation as a whole, but he began to do so then. And certainly not on this temple or Sarpedion's own. Lord Losir is clean. All our temples are foul, and every stone and timber. He paused. Then suddenly, I have it, sire. The amphitheater. The amphitheater. 'Tis well. 'Tis of little enough use, and a shrine will not interfere with what little use it has. Wilt give orders to build? The Lord of Marches issues his own orders. Ola Shilin, to me, the monarch shouted, and the chamberlain of the realm came on the run. Lord Tedric speaks with my voice. I hear, sire. Lord Tedric, I listen. Have built at speed, midway along the front of the amphitheater, on the very edge of the cliff, a table of clean, new quarried stone, 10 feet square and 3 feet high. On it mount Lord Losir so firmly that he will stand upright forever against whatever may come of wind or storm. The chamberlain hurried away. So did Tedric with his bag of spoils. First to his shop, where his armor was removed and where he scratched himself vigorously and delightfully as it came off. Thence to the temple of Sarpedion, where he collected the other, somewhat lesser hallowed trio of the Great One's vital organs. Then, and belatedly, to home and to bed. A little later, while the new made Lord of the Marches was sleeping soundly, the king's messengers rode furiously abroad, spreading the word that 10 days hence, at the fourth period afternoon, in Lampor's amphitheater, great Sarpedion would be sacrificed to Losir, Lomar's new and ultra-powerful god. The city of Lompoor, Lomar's capital, lying on the south bank of the Lotar, some 50 miles inland from the delta, nestled against the rugged breast of the coast range, just outside the town's limit, and some hundreds of feet above its principal streets, there was a gigantic half-bowl carved out of the solid rock by an eddy of some bygone age. This was the amphitheater, and on the very lip of the stupendous cliff descending vertically to the river so far below, Losir stood proudly on his platform of smooth, clean granite. "'Tis not enough like a god, methinks." King Fagon, dressed now in cloth of gold, eyed the gleaming copper statue very dubiously. "'Tis too much like a man, by far." "'Tis exactly as I saw him, sire," Tedric replied firmly. Nor was he consciously lying. By this time he believed the lie himself. Losar is a man god, remember, not a beast god, and 'tis better so. But the time I set is here. With your permission, sire, I begin." Both men looked around the great bowl. Nearby, but not too near, stood the priestess and half a dozen white-clad 15-year-old girls, one of whom carried a beaten gold pitcher full of perfumed oil, another a flaring open lamp wrought of the same material. Slightly to one side were Rhoann, looking, if the truth must be told, as though she did not particularly enjoy her present position on the sidelines. Her mother, the queen, the rest of the royal family, and ranks of courtiers. And finally, much farther back, at a very respectful distance from their strange new god, arranged in dozens of more or less concentric, roughly hemispherical rows, stood everybody who had had time to get there. More were arriving constantly, of course, but the flood had become a trickle. The narrow way worming upward from the city along the cliff's stark side was almost bare of traffic. "Begin, Lord Tedric," said the king. Tedric bent over, heaved the heavy iron pan containing the offerings up onto the platform, and turned. "The oil, Priestess Lady Trice, and the flame?" The acolyte handed the pitcher to Trice, who handed it to Tedric, who poured its contents over the twin hearts, twin livers, and twin brains. Then the lamp, and as the yard-high flames leaped upward, the armored pseudo-priest stepped backward and raised his eyes boldly to the impassive face of the image of his god. Then he spoke, not softly, but in parade ground tones audible to every one present. "Take, Lord Losir, all the strength and all the power and all the force that Sarpedion ever had. Use them, we beg, for good, and not for ill." He picked up the blazing pan and strode toward the lip of the precipice, high mounting smoking flames curling backward around his armored figure. "And now, in token of Sarpedion's utter and complete extinction, I consign these, the last vestiges of his being, to the rushing depths of oblivion." He hurled the pan and its fiercely flaming contents out over the terrific brink. This act, according to Tedric's plan, was to end the program, but it didn't. Long before the fiery mass struck water, his attention was seized by a long, low-pitched, moaning gasp from a multitude of throats, a sound the like of which he had never before even imagined. He whirled and saw, shimmering in a cage-like structure of shimmering bars, a form of seeming flesh, so exactly like the copper image in every detail of shape that it might well have come from the same mold. "Lord Losir, in the flesh!" Tedric exclaimed, and went to one knee. So did the king and his family, and a few of the bravest courtiers. Most of the latter, however, and the girl acolytes, and the thronging thousands of spectators, threw themselves flat on the hard ground. They threw themselves flat, but they did not look away, or close their eyes, or cover their faces with their hands. On the contrary, each one stared with all the power of his optic nerves. The god's mouth opened, his lips moved, and although no one could hear any sound, everyone felt words resounding throughout the deepest recesses of his being. "I have taken all the strength, all the power, all the force, all of everything that made Sarpedion what he was," the god began. In part his pseudo-voice was the resonant clang of a brazen bell, in part the diapason harmonies of an impossibly vast organ. "I will use them for good, not for ill. I am glad, Tedric, that you did not defile my hearth, for this is a hearth, remember, and in no sense an altar, in making this the first and the only sacrifice ever to be made to me. You, Trice, are the first of my priestesses." The girl, shaking visibly, gulped 3 times before she could speak. "Yea, my lord Losir," she managed finally. "That That is, if I please you, Lord Sir. You please me, Trice of Lomor. Nor will your duties be onerous, being only to see to it that your maidens keep my hearth clean and my statue bright. To you, my Lord Losir, sir, all thanks. Wilt keep. Trice raised her downcast eyes and stopped short in mid sentence, her mouth dropping ludicrously open, and her eyes becoming two round O's of astonishment. The air above the yawning abyss was as empty as it had ever been. The flesh and blood god had disappeared as instantaneously as he had come. Tedric's heavy voice silenced the murmured wave of excitement sweeping the bowl. "That is all," he bellowed. "I did not expect the Lord Losir to appear in the flesh at this time. I know not when or ever he will deign to appear to us again. But this I know. Whether or not he ever so deigns, or when, you all know now that our great Lord Losir lives. Is it not so?" "'Tis so! Long live Lord Losir!" Tumultuous yelling filled the amphitheater. "'Tis well. In leaving this holy place, all will file between me and the shrine. First our king, then the lady priestess Trice and her maids, then the family, then the court, then the rest. All men, as they pass, will raise sword arms in salute. All women will bow heads. Will be naught of offerings or of tribute or of fractions. Lord Losir is a god, not a huckstering, thieving, murdering trickster. King Fagon, sire, wilt lead?" Unhelmed now, Tedric stood rigidly at attention before the image of his god. The king did not march straight past him, but stopped short. Taking off his ornate headpiece and lifting his right arm high, he said, "To you, Lord Losir, my sincere thanks for what hast done for me, for my family, and for my nation. While 'tis not seemly that Lomar's king should beg, I ask that you abandon us not." Then Trice and her girls. "We engage, Lord Sir," the lady priestess said at a whispered word from Tedric, "to keep your hearth scrupulously clean, your statue shining bright." Then the queen, followed by Lady Rhoann, who, although she bowed her head meekly enough, was shooting envious glances at her sister, so far ahead and so evidently the cynosure of so many eyes. The rest of the family, the court, the thronging spectators, and last of all Tedric himself, helmet tucked under left arm. He raised his brawny right arm high, executed a stiff left face, and marched proudly at the rear of the long procession. As the people made their way down the steep and rugged path, as they debouched through the city of Lompar, as they traversed the highways and byways back to the towns and townlets and farms from which they had come, it was very evident that Losir had established himself as no other god had ever been established throughout the long history of that world. Great Losir had appeared in person. Everyone there had seen him with his own eyes. Everyone there had heard his voice. A voice of a quality impossible for any mortal being, human or otherwise, to produce. A voice heard, not with the ears, which would have been ordinary enough, but by virtue of some hitherto completely unknown and still completely unknowable inner sense or ability evocable only by the god. Everyone there had heard, sensed him address the Lord Arms Master and the Lady Priestess by name. Other gods had appeared personally in the past. Or had they really? Nobody had ever seen any of them except their own priests, the priests who performed the sacrifices and who fattened on the fractions. Losir now wanted neither sacrifices nor fractions, and, powerful although he was, had appeared to and had spoken to every one alike, of however high or low degree, throughout the whole huge amphitheater. Everyone! Not to the priestess only, not only to those of the old blood, not only to citizens or natives of Lomar, but to everyone, down to mercenaries, chance visitors, and such. Long live Lord Losair, our new and plenipotent god. End of part 1.